Hello and welcome to Ask Lovecraft After Dark. This is our 30th episode, and we are very fortunate to have author John Langan with us tonight. John, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Hi, everybody. It's great to be here.
So, John and I want to say the first time we really got a chance to talk was back when we were doing Miskatonic Musings. John came on and we had ourselves a grand old time. But I think do we keep missing each other at like the various cons, like Necronomicon and whatnot?
I think so. I think that I'm trying to think. I was at the first one and the second one, and then I missed the last one.
Yeah, I missed the one that we just had, and sadly, I'm missing this next one coming up. How about you? Are you getting out there?
I am planning to get out there. Yeah. So I'll be back in the saddle. I guess it'll actually be a busy convention, sort of convention season for me. I'm doing ReaderCon I guess it's still almost 2 months. And then after that, Nikon, where I'm going to be one of the guests of honor, and then sort of wrapping up the summer with Necronomicon Providence.
Fantastic. Well, yes, it should be a busy time. You've got a brand new collection coming out. Just came out back in April. Is that correct?
Yes.
And
April,
Other Betrayals.
April, what was it? April 20th, I think, or so. Well, a number of people who were like, "Oh, 420, man, yeah."
Did you thematically appropriate for that, or were you
I don't know. I don't know if it would help you if you were reading the book, or
just make things that much more spooky. As a quick tangent, when I was studying abroad, I was in this little flat with a bunch of other drama majors, and my room had the window right abutting the balcony, and through some weird I don't know how, some sort of oral effect, I could hear pitch perfectly anything being said out on this balcony, and I could be screaming in my room, and if the window were closed, no one could hear it. So people would come out and have conversations, and of course that's where they went to get high. And like, being a good pedantic nerd that I am, if ever they made some historical or literary reference and got it wrong, I would like pop my head out and correct them, which would of course freak them all out, because it was like some satanic Muppet was suddenly encroaching upon them. But then they would want me to do it again for their friends who were also high. So
yes, indeed. So so it's been out for like almost a month, I guess, at this point.
Fantastic. And how's reception been?
It's been pretty good. Surprisingly, I had a review in the Washington Post from a short but a very lovely review from Michael Derda, and Publishers Weekly liked it, and for which I'm also grateful. And there've been a few different blog posts, Mother Horror and such, that have said some very kind things about it. So I'm waiting for the other shoe to drop. I sort of that inevitable thing.
This is your third published collection at this point. Is that correct?
It is, yeah.
And I guess now that you've done this 3 times, do you feel like you've learned new lessons each time, or do you feel like you're just throwing stuff at the wall and seeing what sticks?
That's a good question. My first collection, my first book, I kind of fell into. I was not planning to publish a collection. I was working on a novel at the point. What would become House of Windows, my first novel, and a couple of people, Nick Mamatas and Paul Tremblay, emailed me separately and said, "Hey, Sean Wallace at Prime Books has an opening for a collection, and do you have enough stuff for a collection?" And I did. So they put me in touch with him, and so that became my first book, and it was basically just the 4 stories I'd had published, and this incredibly long novella, which I really love, called Lau Cohen, but which I kind of knew was it was a kind of a horror take on Saul Bellows Sees the Day. So Saul Bellows Sees the Day, right, is this novella about this absolutely hopeless guy, who just has this disastrous existence, and he's constantly self-sabotaging himself and such. And so I had this idea for this story that was inspired by something that had happened while my wife's from Scotland, and so we were in Scotland, and it must have been right after whatever World Science Fiction Convention had been held in maybe Glasgow. So we were in Edinburgh, But you know, Scotland's a small country, right? Glasgow and Edinburgh are not that far apart from each other geographically. Culturally, they're miles apart. It's like New York and California, you know. But in any event, a friend of hers told a story about finding in the backyard of a neighbor's flat a full-sized articulated alien figure, the Geiger alien figure, just like, you know, out of nowhere. And I thought, man, that is awesome. What a great idea for a story. But of course it's copyright protected, right? So I couldn't use Geiger's alien. But I thought, what if you have this guy, you know, a Bellow-esque sort of loser who encounters this thing. Only in my story, it's missing its head, and he's a sort of kind of quasi-failed artist, and so he decides that he has to make a head for this thing, but in the meantime, as he's trying to do that, he's living his kind of miserable life. So I still really love this story, but yeah, so anyway, I put all of it together. Sean took it. Elizabeth Hand very graciously agreed to write an introduction, and that was that. It actually, that also got a nice review from Publishers Weekly. It was nominated for a Bram Stoker Award, somewhat to my surprise. So I couldn't really complain about it, but it just sort of like, it just kind of happened almost to me, you know. And I know I'm sorry. I know there are people out there who are like, "You son of a," I'm sorry. When it came time for my second collection, that was something I approached much more methodically. I had a lot more stories, and I'd written a lot more stories at this point, and they were very much of a kind. They were very much about traditional monsters, sort of re-envisioned or to which some kind of new lens had been applied. So they fit together in this really neat kind of way, and really almost fortuitously, because I hadn't really planned that. And by that point, I had finished my first novel. I was working on my second novel. Actually, I might have even finished The Fisherman at that point. And so I like to include an original story. And if it's an original novella, that's even better, because I don't know. I guess I have this illusion, right? That which is an illusion, that people are out there reading all my stuff, and when the book comes out, they're like, "Why should I buy this? I already have all of his stuff." And so I thought, oh, okay, well, what would be better is if I give them something new. So I wrote an original novel, what turned into an original novella for that collection, which was also a riff on the trope of the exorcism, but also connected to The Fisherman in all kinds of ways. And that was very nicely received. People had a lot of nice things to say about it. When it came time for the third book, again, I looked at the stories that I had, and I had thought that I was sort of thinking about it numerically. I was thinking, well, I'll put together about 10 stories, because that was about the number I'd used in the previous collection. But this time I had about half a dozen stories that were all about betrayal in different forms. And I just thought, man, I couldn't make the other stories that I thought I might include. I couldn't make them fit that theme. And so I thought, well, it's going to have to be a somewhat shorter collection. But I had first one and then two original stories that I wound up including, which were also about betrayal, and they helped to lengthen the book. And one of them turned into a literal short novel. So that's the title story. So you know, I think what's interesting to me about them is the way that when I put these things together, they start to reveal themselves to me. I look at a collection or a selection of stories, and I say, okay, you're going to need about 10 stories. And then I think, no, these 6 fit together. You're going to have to do something else. And then, I have enough stuff that I'm already putting together my 4th collection. And again, and my 5th for that matter. And in the case of the 4th, that's much more grab bag. It's in a way, it's a little more like the second collection, except the stories there were written principally for anthologies related to other writers. And so it's as much there were lots of traditional monsters in it, but it's as much about me responding to people, a lot of Lovecraft stuff, because there's been a lot of Lovecraft anthologies, and then also things like, or people, I guess, people like Legati and Robert Chambers, Laird Barron, so that's underway. And then the collection after that, those stories were from a period where I was very deliberately trying to write autobiography. I was really trying to draw on my own autobiography to see what what horrors lurked there. So I'm not sure I'm not sure what we're doing with those exactly at this point. I have enough for a sixth and probably half of a seventh collection, but I haven't really looked at them closely enough yet to understand what they're going to be like.
Do you find it's a bit like making a mixtape? You're looking at your albums and being like, oh, this, I like this song, but it doesn't really fit with this, so I'll have to make a second mixtape later, that has these stories in it. Is it that kind of feeling?
It's become,
or do you really?
Yeah, no, it's become much more like that. Originally, it was just how many stories do I have, and then, but as I started to as I started to write more and to find that I could write more, if you know what I mean, that I was getting a little bit better at producing things slightly faster than one a year, which was my kind of rate when I started. As that happened, I started to become a little bit more self-conscious about writing different kinds of stories. So every now and again, I would think, oh yeah, this is something I could use some autobiography here. I have this idea that's sort of autobiographical. Let's go with that. And then other times I would think, no, thankfully, none of my autobiography fits into a Legati tribute story. So I'll just have to make with that. Yeah, that would be bad, right? Oh, Legati, that's, he might have written the script of my life.
Yeah, you don't want that. Danielle Steele, maybe. Legati. Ugh.
Yeah, I would take. I've never read Danielle. My mom is a huge Danielle Steele fan, whom I read the other day is still alive and has written something like 179 books. So good for you, Danielle Steele.
That
good
sounds
for you.
legit.
Yeah.
I had the opportunity to read your second collection, which was the Wide Carnivore Sky, and my favorite piece in that, it was again one you're sort of talking about, basing off of other writers. This was your sort of Poe pastiche, Technicolor.
Yes.
And Technicolor definitely has the distinction of stories that I've read in that you made me look up a fake historical figure because I wanted to know more about him.
Yeah. That
you done hoaxed me, John.
Yeah. Well, this is the thing, right? That just kind of happened. But on the other hand, there was a kind of a meta way after I was done with the story that I thought this is completely appropriate because Poe was all about hoaxes. And Poe, of course, a number of his, what we now think of as his, his stories, his best stories, started off life as hoaxes. The Facts in the Case of M. Valdemar is the one, it's probably my favorite of those. And he presented this as, oh yeah, this really happened. It's French, it must be true. And, they do all kinds of crazy stuff, bringing back not bringing back the dead, but keeping the dead from dying all the way. Sure, the French could do that. So I liked that idea. I liked that idea that and I think it actually was Lovecraft as well, who said something to the effect of a horror story has to work like a hoax. You have to believe it. You have to. It's an interesting, psychologically, it's an interesting choice or phrasing for Lovecraft, I suppose. But I think just as look at it another way, it's the kind of stuff obviously that Lovecraft does. Who was it? Was it was it Robert E. Howard or one of those guys who no, I don't think it was Howard. Maybe it was Robert Blocks. Anyway, at least one person contacted Lovecraft saying, "Hey, the Necronomicon, where can I get a copy of that?" Actually, I'm sure many.
People still think the Necronomicon is real, right? Or want to know about all these things that they sort of were play acting and pretending and the way they sort of wrote letters to each other, as if they were part of some secret necromantic cabal. They were very much playing in this world, almost role playing avant la lettre in an interesting way.
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. And so that was and that's something that the Laird Barron and I have done occasionally, is write back and forth. You know, there were things in my stories that are drawn from his stories and vice versa. And you know, eventually 100 years from now, when we're moldering in our graves, some little, you know, some promising academic will will devote a short thesis to teasing out those connections.
Well, I think so, you mentioned something earlier that tickled me. You talked about sort of, you know, falling in, or you know, sort of being given this opportunity, but you're sort of beginning to get yourself published has one of the best sort of Kickstarter moments, mostly because it involves a very smart spouse giving you stern advice.
Yes.
Your wife's advice about who you should pitch to first. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I my wife is much smarter than I am. And
I know that feeling.
oh, yeah, yeah. And she, when I finished the first story, what would become my story on Skua Island, the first story that I thought, man, I might actually try to publish this. The story was, it was something like 13,000 words, or it was a pretty long story. And I was looking around for venues to publish it in, but the only places that would publish it were places like the Magazine of Fantasy and Science Fiction, which of course was a dream to get published in, but you know, because it was the Magazine of Fantasy and Science Fiction. But for that very reason, I thought, no, 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 no. I need to find some place that will publish a ridiculously long story, but that is much lower on the food chain, or lower on the ladder, so that I'll have a better chance of getting in. And my wife's professor, she had gotten her PhD at Penn State, and her professors had told her, when you were submitting an article for publication, you start at the top. You make a list of the best places that you can get in, or you place your article in, and you start at the very top. And the thing is, if you get rejected at the very top, who can feel bad about that? It was the very top. You were, you know, you were shooting for the moon. So if you don't get in, no harm, no foul, and you keep going down the ladder. Now, of course, if you do get into the very top, you just got in at the very top, and that was, you know, that was the case for me. But even had I not gotten in at the Magazine of Fantasy and Science Fiction, wherever I got in, would still have been better than like the very, you know, bottom rung of the ladder. So it's a kind of a message, I guess, to aspiring writers: always start at the top. Always go for shoot for the moon. And if you don't get in, that's fine. That's, you know, you were trying to get into the New Yorker or whatever. That's okay. But again, if you do get in, you just got into the New Yorker. So so yeah, it was good advice. And here's the thing. In all fairness to other new writers, I don't know if I would have followed it. You know, if it hadn't been my wife who was telling me, if a friend was telling me or whatever, I probably would have said, "Oh, sure, easy for you to say." But you know, my wife was like, "No, you can do this. Go ahead and do this." And it's really difficult. I understand, for a lot of new writers, it does feel intimidating to send something to Nightmare magazines, say, or The Dark, or Uncanny, or Black Static, you know, or FNSF. But as Lady Macbeth says, screw your courage to the sticking place, and give it a try. There's nothing to lose. Just be patient after that. So.
And so, starting from sort of fantasy and science fiction, did it sort of, you know, feel like there's only down to go? We had a comment asking about that in our comment section here, or did it just sort of open up doors and give you the confidence to keep moving forward?
I would say that you can always go down. You can always. Um, but if the lives of artists have taught me anything, you know, you're speaking of Poe, right? You can always wind up delirious and drunk in the gutter. Um, no, it made me feel that I could submit again to FNSF, so that was good. Um, I didn't. I was pretty naive actually at that point. I knew about this was in 2000 technically. It was when I got the acceptance. I knew about FNSF and such, but um, I didn't really know about sci fiction. And then eventually I learned about sci fiction, but I wasn't writing quickly enough. I didn't want to give up, as it were, submitting to fantasy and science fiction. They had published me first. I wanted to keep submitting to them. Um, if I had been able to write 2 stories a year instead of 1, which was my very like low pressure goal for myself at that time, I definitely would have tried sci fiction. It did open up doors. There's no doubt about it. After I got to think about it. After my second story, Mr. Gaunt came out. The year after that, I went to my first 2 conventions: ReaderCon in July and World Fantasy Convention in Halloween weekend. And at ReaderCon, yeah, Ellen Datlow, someone introduced me to her. It might have been Gordon Van Gelder, and she said, "Oh, that's great. When are you going to write a story for me?" No pressure. Um, and so yeah, it definitely did help. It definitely did help in terms of introductions, or someone like Ellen pays attention to what's going on. I was lucky in that that's my second story, Mr. Gaunt, had been picked up by I'm trying to think of the exact phrasing. There were at that point about 3 different best fantasy / horror titles. There was the one that Ellen was editing with Terry Windling. There was David Hartwell, the late David Hartwell, and Catherine Kramer were doing one. And there was a very brief one. I think it lasted like 2 years, maybe, that Robert Silverberg was editing with somebody else. And so Mr. Gaunt got picked up for that. And when Gary Wolfe did his roundup of year's best anthologies, he mentioned my story and he said, "Oh, why didn't these other anthologies take it?" And I said, "That's right, Gary, you're my favorite critic." And so that may have helped too. That then Ellen, Terry, etc. They read Locust. They pay attention to those reviews. So yeah, all of that helped. It's kind of funny because in some ways I feel like, there's always someplace bigger for you to go. Like, I'm sort of thinking about that question and thinking that you can certainly reach a publication, and you can think to yourself, okay, I've done it. Like, there was a part of me after my first story was published, because it was published, it got good reviews, and then it was nominated for an International Horror Guild Award when those were still a thing, which was just kind of mind blowing. And there was almost part of me that I'm grateful I didn't win that award, because if I had won that award, I might have just thought, I'm done. I'm not, I'm not, it's not going to get any better than this. The first story had gotten the cover illustration for fantasy and science fiction. So it was kind of like there was nothing more I could want, except like a phone call from Stephen King saying, "Great job, kid." So that being I certainly understand how when you reach that kind of success that early, it can be almost a little paralyzing. I say to my creative writing students sometimes, creative writing teachers teach you how to handle failure. We teach you how to handle rejection. At least we talk about it, because it does happen a lot. A lot, either your story gets rejected, or you get a bad review, or this thing that people do nowadays where they're like, "I didn't like your story, John Langan," and they tag you on Facebook or Twitter or whatever. Thanks so much. That's great. That's right. Your mother
just like a drive-by egging,
Right. I was like, your mother never taught you any manners. Good. Or your father, for that matter. I guess. Okay, so we teach you how to deal with all that stuff, but we don't teach you how to handle success. And success can be really overwhelming, and success can feel just as paralyzing as failure does. If you're used to failure, however you define failure, you're used to not getting published or whatever, you can say, oh, well, okay, suck it up, get back in there, fight the good fight. But if you have a modicum of success, even the teeny bit that I had at the starting out, that can be kind of difficult to assimilate, because you feel like, oh my God, I got what I wanted, and now what? And so I think that the way that you maybe try to deal with that is to have something else that you're already looking ahead to, something else that you're thinking, okay, what's next? So whether that's publication, in my case, that was publication with Ellen, and wanting to be published in one of her anthologies, and also wanting to, at that early stage, thinking, oh, someday I'll write a book, So I think what you try to do, for me anyway, is to keep yourself, to keep something ahead of you. You absolutely want to be able to enjoy your successes when you have them, and you should. And if you however you define that success, when you get that acceptance that you really want to have, you should take yourself out to dinner, or if it's not that much money, at least buy yourself a Coke. But do something to mark the event for yourself. But I think for a writer, it's probably healthy also to have some idea of where you want to go next, whatever that's going to consist of.
Well, and you've mentioned now Mr. Gaunt a time or two. Correct me if I'm wrong, but the inspiration of Mr. Gaunt came from one of your kids. Is that correct?
Yeah. My older son, when he was pretty small, like 10 or 11 maybe, he had written a story for his school class, and it was about a knight who's kind of like Don Quixote, who goes and fights a skeleton. And at this point, I guess maybe I should back up and say that my thought in writing horror stories was that I would sort of go through a lot of traditional monsters, and it helped me to write my stories. If I thought, okay, my first story was on School Island, was a mummy story, and I thought, well, what are the conventions of a mummy story? And you sort of think, oh, Egypt, the mummy is always male. It's usually a high-ranking official who's been punished for some horrible trespass. Unlucky archaeologists disturb it, blah, 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 right? And so I thought, well, what if you turn all of that inside out in a very simple and sort of straightforward way? And so I was thinking about that. I was thinking about sort of traditional monsters that could be handled in some different kind of way. And, I knew I wanted to get to like the vampire and the werewolf and that, but at the moment, like, the mummy seemed a little bit safer to kind of mess around with. And so when my son talked about writing a skeleton story, I thought, I wonder what you could do with the skeleton. And a friend of mine, I think it was Bob Waugh, who's a Lovecraft scholar and fiction writer in his own right, and a brilliant poet. I was talking it over with Bob, and Bob was like, nope, can't do it. And I said, why not? And he said, well, the skeleton's too, like, it's kind of too ironic, skeletons always just, they look ironic, and so that was also that sort of set the bar as well, for okay, how can I do a skeleton that's not ironic? And so, yeah, that story, yeah, same thing. That story had a lot of success. Got me my second International Horror Guild nomination, and yeah, at some point thereafter, I said to my older son, "Okay, so you got any other ideas for monsters? Is there anything else you can do?" And,
did you give him a little credit, a little writing credit, or?
Yeah, right. I shouldn't I? Yeah, don't tell him that. Yeah, no, he said to me, oh, you need to write like a giant monster story. And I have been trying ever since then to do that. And I've written a number of stories with giant monsters in them, but I still haven't managed to hit what I think is a sort of a good giant monster story. That's something that had the feel I thought I would need to try for. So there, I guess it also goes.
Well, While we're thinking up giant monster stories, we're going to do a quick ad break because the fine folk at the Arkham Bazaar, HB Lovecraft Film Festival, and CthulhuCon, we're down to they have sent us these wonderful pins that we're handing out to lucky viewers. So this time around, if you would like to enter in, this I think is one of our last pins. So we're actually going to open this up not just to the continental US, but also to Canada. So finally, our Canadian viewers can get a chance to win one of these things. All you have to do is email in to asklovecraft@gmail.com with the subject line John Langan. And let's see, what should we have you do? Okay. Pretend that John Langan is your dad and you've got to pitch him on a monster. So there we go. That's all you just put in the body of the text. And then I'll pick a winner come Friday night. And I'll send you one of our last few pins. And thank you all. Thank you especially to the fine folks at Arkham Bazaar who've been wonderful supporters of the show, to the Callahans. Thank you guys. And thank you all, everyone who has sent in and acquired your delightful pens. So you've mentioned, John, the various conventions you've got coming up. You've got Saphira out right now. What else can folks look forward to coming from you in the next little while?
I have another novella coming in Ellen Datlow's Echoes, which is the big book of ghost stories that was actually supposed to be out last summer, and something happened, and I'm not quite clear what, but it's coming out this August. I'm not sure if it will be out in time for Necronomicon Providence. It's got stories by Paul Tremblay and Nathan Ballingrid. It's just this gigantic book. I wound up writing this story that grew into just a novella this time, not a short novel. So that'll be out in a couple months. And I have a story in a mummy anthology, another mummy story that called Spirits Unwrapped, but I'm not sure. Dan Brown is editing that, and I'm not sure exactly when that's coming out. And I'm trying to finish up a massive and massively delayed project for Ellen Datlow for an anthology. Ellen likes to bust my chops constantly in public about how late I am on everything. And it's absolutely true. I am absolutely guilty of being late because these days, actually, it's not even these days. This has always been my problem: is that every story I write tends to grow in the telling, and I think, oh, I could do this and I could do that, and what about this and what about that? And in my mind, when I start off, they're all going to be about like about 40 pages is what I imagine, and they usually, or more often than not these days, they double that or more. I've always felt more comfortable at longer lengths. So.
Well, fantastic. That's a lot to look forward to. If folks want to follow you online or find out more about you, where are the best places for them to go?
Well, I still am on Facebook, but you're probably better to look at my WordPress site, my blog, Mr. Gaunt. If you look for that, you just Mr. Gaunt, the web presence for John Langan horror writer or something like that. That has a lot of links to my stuff. I'm on Twitter, Instagram, that sort of stuff. I think I even used to be on Google Plus when that was still a thing. But
got to keep your hands in all the pies.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I don't do Snapchat, although who knows.
There's still always time. Maybe
right.
I can't. I'm on a college campus and I've got no idea what people are doing. I had a very good Yik Yak presence for a while, but then that went down. So
yeah, I don't even know what that is. You could make that up. You could just make up things and say, yeah, I'm on Bloop. And I would say, oh, Bloop, I better get on Bloop. Yeah.
There we go. There's our next anthology, The Horror of Social Media.
Right.
Well, John, thank you so much for coming on the show. Thanks for everyone who's been watching. This has been Ask Lovecraft After Dark. It's the sister program to my regular show, Ask Lovecraft, which can be found 3 times a week over on YouTube or at asklovecraft.com. If folks are interested in following the show and being part of our live conversation, you can join the Facebook group, the Ask Lovecraft Appreciation Society. If you want to find out about my various shows, live shows, I'm going to be performing at George R. R. Martin's Jean Cocteau Cinema in July. So if you're out in Santa Fe, New Mexico, you can come see me live out there. That's at the end of July. And You can go to lehmankessler.com to find that information. You can follow me on Twitter, screaming into the void as always at Lehman Kessler. And if you enjoyed the show so much and you want to help support us, you can go to patreon.com/asklovecraft and help keep the lights on. Once again, thank you all so much for being part of the show. John, thank you for coming on. We hope we can have you on again. And yeah, it's been an absolute blast.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. And thanks everybody for watching.
All right. Bye all.